Hi, everyone. This is going to be your quick lecture on the genetic and environmental influences on intelligence. When looking at genetic influence, we often find ourselves going straight to twin studies, more specifically identical twins. In a study of 163 identical twins, two people who have exactly the same DNA, but however were reared apart, so different environments, their test scores were like the same person taking the test twice. Fraternal twins were less likely to have the same results. Fraternal twins carry about 50% of the same genetic material as their sibling, but have the same first environment in utero. Bouchard in 96 showed 70% of intelligence variations should be attributed to genetic variations. Other researchers have lowered it down to 50%. One gene located on chromosome 6 had been identified as an influence on intelligence, looking at a third of children with high intelligence test scores showing this variant. More modern research coming out in the last couple of years has shown that the X chromosome is usually the chromosome carrying the influence for intelligence, and that they believe it is a mother that contributes the intelligence to her children. By inserting an extra gene into fertilized mouse eggs, we were able to manipulate and make more intelligent mice. Here, when we're looking at a correlational study of intelligence scores and genetic similarity, we find that identical twins that have the same environment have almost identical intelligence. Next to that is identical twins with different environments. Then fraternal twins, they have the same first environment being in utero. Then siblings that are reared together in the same environment, and then completely unrelated individuals. If you look at the common factors in these, the more likely people are genetically similar, they increase the likelihood of having similar intelligence levels. The degree to which genetics and environment impact intelligence is something that is still being studied and discussed. When we look at things like fraternal twins, twins that are no more genetically similar than any other pairing of siblings, they seem to have more similar test scores. This may be because they share the same environment from conception through growth. However, when we look at adoptive children, we find that their intelligence scores become more like their biological parents as they age. This leads us to a concept called heritability. This is not the same as inheritance. When we talk about heritability, you can have two identical twins that have the same genetics, but the environment may allow them to express things slightly differently. This allows for variability among different populations and in different environments. We can attribute 50% of a variation in intelligence within a group of people to heritability. That means environmental factors or other variations in their environment that have an impact on them. Our genes shape our experiences that shape us. We also think that sometimes what people express as intelligence is their natural navigation towards the areas in life that they would be most successful because they're genetically set up to be successful there. As you look at this information presented, notice that what we're looking at is essentially family studies, children and the degree to which they are related to their parents. In green, we have children and their birth parents, red, adoptive children and their birth parents or their genetic parents, and then adoptive children and their adoptive parents. We're looking at their verbal ability scores, which in most IQ tests is one of the factors that is scored. At roughly 3 years of age, most of the data points are rather close and we're not seeing a huge amount of variation. However, as the children's brains become more fixed and they get older at about 16 years of age, you notice that there's a huge gap between the scores of the children that are being compared to their biological parents and adoptive children and their adoptive parents. This leads more towards the idea that maybe genetics have some play in our overall expression, and that environment may not be as impactful. In 1976, J.M. Hunt published research that he had done in Tehran, Iran, with children in orphanages there. He noted that children received minimal care. They were kept clean and fed, but otherwise not truly interacted with. By age 2, the children could not sit up unassisted, and by age 4, they could not walk. To put this in a frame of reference, the average child should be sitting upright unassisted by 9 months of age and should be able to start walking without any help around about a year or so. What he noticed was the environment was having a huge impact on their intelligence. This extreme neglect was preventing them from growth. Hunt began a program called Tutored Human Enrichment. In other words, extreme interaction with these children, and the children began to flourish. The finding of this was very simple. An impoverished environment can take a toll on cognitive development. Therefore, we can assume that while genetics do play a part, environment can also be equally important. The research that was conducted by Hunt led to the creation of things like Head Start programs. These are early childhood intervention programs. Head Start starts in the preschool years and addresses any early education issues with nutrition or exposure to education for children who come from impoverished environments. To be an effective intervention program, we know that they must begin early in a child's life and continue longer, be intensive, so that means more hours a day and more days per year in a schooling environment, provide children with direct educational experiences, other than relying on parent training. And again, you can look at a multitude of reasons why the parents might not be present. It can be from things like having to work multiple jobs or not having the resources in the home, and offer a support program for maintaining the positive attitude and behaviors that are gained during the program as the child continues through their educational experience. Another environmental impact worth looking at is schooling. When we look at schooling effects, schooling is related to intelligence scores to a degree. In 1997, Ceci and Williams looked at how school and intelligence contribute to each other. High intelligence is conducive to prolonged schooling, and that's easy to kind of understand. If school is easy, you'll probably stay in it longer, and if you have high intelligence, chances are schooling can feel easier. Intelligence scores tend to rise during the school year and then decline during the summer months. And again, this is because it's like flexing a muscle. We're working out our intelligence during the school year, challenging it to learn and grow and to develop. And during the summer months, maybe not so much. We also look at the Flynn effect. And again, this is that idea that the changing environment, the prolonged education, has led to an increase in intelligence scores from generation to generation. Finally, older students in a grade tend to have higher IQ scores or intelligence scores than younger children. You have to remember that within a grade, you can have children as far apart in age as a full calendar year, and a year worth of development in your childhood is really important. This graph illustrates the age-related schooling effect. If we go down to grade 4, at 120 months, a child is 10 years of age. Some children in a given grade will be closer to 10.5 and others closer to 9.5 years of age. The children who are going through that grade at 9 and 9.5 years of age have lower scores than those children in the exact same grade that are almost a full calendar year older than them. Anytime we're looking at young children, every week and month matters. And so we have children who are at very different developmental points in a single classroom. The age of the children may be very important to how they perform and how successful they are in school. It is important to note that people are different, and being such, we look at education and IQ scores based off of all of our differences. Sometimes we'll look at racial and ethnic differences, gender, and even socioeconomic. Many of these gaps are continuing to close. Racial groups differ in their average scores on intelligence tests, but the gap between whites and blacks is diminishing. The same with males and females, depending on the courses and the classes that you're looking at. High-scoring people and groups are more likely to attain high levels of education and income. And that is the goal, is to make sure that everyone has access to a way to meet their full potential. Group differences provide little basis for judging individuals. So what might be true about a very large group may not hold true for the individual in front of you. Just keep that in mind. When we look at racial gaps in IQ scores, we find out that it might be more environmental than anything else. Genetics reveal that the races are remarkably alike. Individuals within a race are more likely to show differences than between the races. Asian students outperform American students on math achievement and aptitude tests. However, this is a recent phenomenon. Asian students also attend school 30% more in their days per year and spend more time studying than American students. Generational group differences are not attributed to genetics. Time in school, access to resources in the environment have differed. When we look at white and black infants, they score equally well on infant intelligence measures. And finally, you can go to any culture and any race, and they've all had some form of a golden age or a golden era. It's important to note that these things change over time, and so maybe a lot of these gaps come from the environment and is not built into the individual. It's easy for us to understand that if we were to plant, say, some seeds in two different flower boxes, provide one with fertilizer, sunlight, and water, and the other with maybe soil that we just dug up somewhere, limited light, and not a whole lot of water, that one group of flowers would easily outgrow the other. This is the concept that comes in when we talk about the environmental impact on group differences. Nutrition, education, exposure to new experiences all change the landscape of the brain, making it a more integrated and more developed organ. And if our brain is where our intelligence lies, having a more developed brain means something. When we talk about gender similarities and differences in intelligence, this mirrors often the conversation that we have with race. There's greater diversity within the genders, often than between the genders. When we're looking at math and spatial abilities, usually where we see the greatest differences are the extremes. Extremely high on the SAT seem to be more often males than females, but the average girl tends to excel or at least equal the average boy. It is important to know that we have significantly closed the math and science gap between boys and girls. However, the reading and literacy gap hasn't been closed as significantly, leaving mostly males suffering from low reading and low literacy scores. Here you have the mental rotation test of spatial abilities. This test works by looking at the standard object and determining which of the configurations of blocks is identical but just in a rotated fashion. Males tend to be more efficient and more correct in this task. It doesn't mean that women can't do it. It's just that men tend to do it more efficiently. This may be a holdover from evolution, with men having slightly larger and more developed parietal lobes. The evolutionary explanation for the previous slide is that males needed to navigate and track prey, but then they also needed to turn around and find their ways home. Females also tend to have some evolutionary holdovers for their abilities, like superior memory for the location of edible plants. Think of this the next time you ask someone in your family where you may have left something or if anyone has seen something. Chances are, it might be your mom is the one that notices where things have been left around. Social explanation for some of the differences in gender can come from the idea that up until recently, math and science were considered to be more masculine subjects. And so boys were more encouraged to go into those disciplines. In the last couple of decades, roughly from the 1980s and on, there's been an encouragement of girls to go into math and sciences, closing that gender gap. Another gender difference that we often see is emotion detecting ability. Empathy, or your ability to understand how someone is feeling, is often seen more in women than it is in men. Women tend to be better than men on the averages. This doesn't mean that you can't meet a very empathic male or a woman who seems to not read emotional signals well. One of the evolutionary explanations for why women tend to outperform men is that women were required to read the emotions on their nonverbal infants' faces, and that was important to meeting the child's needs. They would often also read those emotions then on their mates. It is important that we standardize and norm tests across a great population when we use them to detect intelligence. If a test detects not only innate differences in intelligence, but also differences caused by a cultural experience, they are in fact biased. They can test a person's experience and environment, causing it more beneficial to one group maybe than to another. If unequal past experiences predict unequal future achievements, an aptitude test that is valid should point out such inequalities. Finally, it's important when looking at creating a test for something like an SAT or a major aptitude test that we norm and standardize tests across a very large population of people. The major aptitude tests are not biased in the statistical meaning of the term. Something like the SAT will show roughly good predictive scores for people of different race and different socioeconomic backgrounds. This ends our discussion on the genetic and environmental impacts on intelligence. There is another video available if you'd like to do a Unit 7 review. It should be in Schoology.